Hey, I'm Sam Peterson. Today we're talking with Chris Gates, an old friend of mine who was a musician for about 15 years until drugs derailed his career and has found sobriety, started working in the recovery field, and he's got a lot of really interesting stuff to say about depression and sobriety. It's going to blow your mind. So please hang on. Me and Chris Gates, why live? Hey,
Hey, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing all right.
Thanks for coming after work. That's
Yeah,
uh,
well, the work thing was easy. It was just hanging out in the park with a bunch of alumni. But I'm I played the first show that I've played in nearly 3 years yesterday, and I'm wiped out from it. So
oh wow. Where was that?
I played it at this place called the Parlor. It's a all ages pizza joint up on Guadalupe.
Oh nice. Oh,
It's
that's
great. Yeah,
awesome.
played a matinee from 4 to 7, which is perfect for people my age.
I get it. Yeah.
I want to rock. I just like to do it at a reasonable hour.
Totally. Yes. And then nap. Yeah, so thank you for doing this. I haven't seen you in forever.
Yeah, it's been a minute.
Can we can we talk about drugs and alcohol? Is that okay?
Yeah, anything. We can talk about anything. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
My
didn't
life's a
know.
matter of public record. So it's really,
Right. Yeah, well, and I have made a career talking about myself, so
yeah. Yeah, me too.
as one does.
No secret.
Yeah, so I don't think of you as a depressed person necessarily, but I know that you have been through some incredibly rough times, and I don't know what your
Oh, and I do.
background is.
I still battle with clinical depression. That I was hospitalized because they thought I was trying to commit suicide when I was 20. You
Wow.
know, I, I had a breakdown when I was 17 and spent 5 days locked in my room, but we didn't have any insurance. So I didn't get seen to. When I was 20, we had gotten my dad's job had health insurance, and I ended up in a hospital for 5 days,
Uh-huh.
and that's when I first got put on antidepressants. And,
Oh yeah.
you know,
Did that help?
oh yeah, big time,
Oh
huge.
wow.
Like, you know, 6 weeks after I got on them, I felt as good as I'd ever felt. And 3 months after I got on them, I felt better than I had ever felt,
Wow.
you know?
Wow. So you and I are about the same age, and I went to my first psych ward when I was, yeah, same thing, like 16. And I didn't get on medication until like, oh, I don't know, late in the game. And it was such a revelation to me.
Yeah. Well, and that's a lot of people's story. I mean, I have a friend he's 27 years sober now. And when he was 20 years sober, he was diagnosed with bipolar 1. And,
Nice.
and they put him on meds, but like his bipolar was like 95% depression. I mean, a
Wow.
tiny bit of mania. And
Yeah.
like he got diagnosed and they put him on the meds, and he called me like a month after he started the meds. I didn't know any of this had happened. And he told me what was going on. I was going, is this how normal people feel? Because I've never felt like this.
Yeah.
And he just, he was sober, but he was just living in this grind. And yeah, like,
Yeah.
I'm lucky because, I mean, in 1981, I guess, is when I got put on. There wasn't a lot going on then. It was still pretty early in the med game,
Hmm.
but it helped immensely. And in fact, my addiction really took off when I was 22 and I aged out of my parents' insurance and I couldn't afford the meds anymore. And
Oh yeah.
like so many people, I had depression, so I was taking speed, you know, and
Yeah.
like you do. And
Yeah.
and honestly, antidepressants are part of my story in getting sober as well,
Hmm.
because the nurse at the methadone clinic I was chained to read an article saying that you could put people on well above the maximum recommended dose of Prozac for a short period of time to help, because if you're on methadone and all the other stuff, all the psych meds are getting filtered out of your bloodstream 90 miles an hour because your liver's working overtime to get the other stuff out.
Oh, wow.
And so they put you on a much higher dose for like 6 weeks.
Yeah.
To prepare you mentally to try and make a change. And that's part of what happened.
Wow.
So, you know,
because I was on methadone too, and I didn't get any of this information. That
yeah, well, I didn't, and I didn't know till well after I got sober that like if you're drinking, your meds won't work because your liver is doing so much to get the alcohol or the weed or the whatever out, and it's also pulling the meds back to a level below efficacy. So,
I didn't know what the mechanism was, but I understand that you don't do the things together. And my sobriety story is absolutely tied in with my history of depression. If I'm not taking care of my mental health, it's quick to, despair and then relapse. So
yeah, it has to be a twofold thing for me. No chance I stayed sober the first 5 years without the right meds, and it was very much things would start getting dark. And then I would have to look around and see whether there was step work I needed to do or if there was something that I had missed. But if I did that and 3 days later it was still dark, I needed to call my doctor because it was going to take a week to get in to see him and 2 weeks beyond that for any med change to take effect. And if I waited till day 6 or 7, I wouldn't be able to make the phone call anymore.
When did you figure that out?
Almost immediately.
God, Chris.
Well, I'm a
I
systems
don't know what happened
analyst.
for me.
I'm a systems analyst by nature.
Okay.
When I was 5, I started taking things apart to see how they worked. And by the time I was 7, I could get some of them back together again. And just the way my mind naturally works is wanting to understand systems and constantly chewing on things, trying to understand how they work. That's not good or bad. It's just how I am.
Yeah.
In some cases, it's incredibly beneficial. And in other cases, it's exhausting and pointless. But in this situation, it was like, and it's because of a couple of holes I fell into in early sobriety where I was trying to tell myself how great I was doing because I hadn't used. But the truth was, I would get up and I would go to work and I would go home and I would sit in the dark, and that's all I would do.
Oh, wow.
And it was like, and I would tell myself, at least I'm sober.
Right.
And then finally I would realize, and anybody who's familiar with depression knows that like after a certain point, I don't know that I'm capable of making the phone call.
Yeah.
Right. It's one of the challenges, especially of being broke. Cause like I was still going to the county mental health service, in early sobriety and the whole time I was using. And like one of those times in early sobriety, I was calling them. I'm broke, whatever. They're doing the best they can with the money they've got. But I called them one time and I finally got somebody on the phone. I stared at the phone for 4 days. And then I finally made the call. And I got somebody on the phone and they said, the person you need, I told them what was going on. I told them everything that was going on. And they said, wow, that's really too bad. The person you need to talk to is not here. Call back in an hour, and hung up. And I didn't call back for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Because I couldn't.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so pretty quick early on, I realized that like the actions of the program are phenomenal and they produce this great result, but they don't change my brain chemistry. And I can't tell whether I'm spiritually unfit or my brain chemistry is going funny. They feel the same.
Yeah.
For a minute.
Yeah.
Right. And so I got to do the work I can do. And then if nothing's changing, I got to call the doc.
Right.
And interesting, like I spent the last 6 years working at and eventually being the director of a nonprofit drug and alcohol treatment center here in town. And the last year and a half, because of the pandemic and everything else that's going on, was incredibly draining. And it was very demanding. And I love the job and I love being able to help people. I was working mostly with women and children who brought their children with them to treatment. And
that sounds right up your alley.
Yeah, perfect. But it was really demanding.
Yeah.
And then we had to go out of business, just circumstance, can't fundraise in a pandemic.
Yeah. And shit.
And my wife insisted that I take a couple of 3 months off. Don't even look for work for 3 months. So I took off. We closed in the beginning of October, and I took off October and November And in early December, I was sort of assessing how I was doing. And I realized that like, I haven't worked in 8 weeks. Whatever burnout I'm experiencing, that's over now. And I'm only
Right.
about 50% better. Like I still have no passion. I still have no energy. I still don't feel like me. And I
Mhm.
suddenly realized now that all the other distractions have been pulled away, something's shifted in my body and I need to get back on an antidepressant. I haven't been on one in over a decade, but
Mhm.
something's changed. And,
Mhm.
I'm knock wood. I think I found what I need and it's working and it's at the right dose and the side effects are manageable and, that ordeal.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, I feel like myself again, and I'm starting to be passionate about things and play music again and all that.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah. That's awesome.
but it took clearing away some of the stuff that was a perfect explanation for why I wasn't, I didn't have time to do anything I liked, which is ridiculous. I always have time to do stuff I like. I just didn't have the spiritual and psychological energy to do it
Uh-huh.
by the time I got home from the job. I
And
barely
it's
had enough
really
sleep.
that it's hard to just to differentiate.
Right.
Yeah. So Chris, it you, you had depression early. You were, you had this clinical diagnosis. What was going on before then? Like, what were you experiencing? Do you think, I mean, and were these events that happened, or were you just born
Not
chemically?
situational at all.
Yeah.
It's all biochemical.
Okay.
It's and like an awful lot of people, both my daughters, puberty is what happened.
Okay.
And hormones change and body chemistry changes and depression started happening.
Mm-hmm.
And that part of the prefrontal cortex that's coming to maturity at 16, 17 to 22 or 23, it's all the brain, a big chunk of the brain comes online during those years. The last bit of adult brain development is happening. And mine just wasn't producing much dopamine or serotonin, I guess.
Mm-hmm. And when did drugs and alcohol start playing a part in that?
Well, like I started smoking pot when I was 13,
Mm-hmm.
and I started drinking on the weekends in high school, but none of that, it wasn't an issue. It wasn't like, I know people my wife was blackout drinking by 8,
Right.
That's not my story.
Yeah,
I had
yeah.
a great time drinking and smoking weed and doing whatever in high school. And I wasn't trying to fix anything. I was mostly okay.
Okay.
And then the depression started getting bad around senior year. And, after I also realized around the time I got hospitalized that like the weed was making me dumb. So I stopped smoking pot and it was drinking and whatever, but like I was going to college full time and paying for it myself, working full time and supporting myself and playing in a band full time and booking shows and setting up shows and I don't register stress normally. I don't get anxious. I just don't notice. It just get more and more on my plate until it's too much. And then I just snap and I shut down. And so that's what happened when they got worried about me when I was 20. And the funny thing is like I quit smoking pot and then I don't know whether stopping smoking pot and 9 months later having a breakdown are connected. But then like, once I got on the antidepressants, I stopped drinking or doing any drugs or anything for about a year because I felt great. I didn't see any point, And then I fell off my parents' insurance and started drinking again. And very quickly I was drinking so much I was passing out. And so I started to do meth so I wouldn't pass out because people couldn't get me back to the car. And,
wow.
And then 6 years later, and there were several attempts to get back on meds in there, but with no money.
Yeah.
And the mental health authority in the area being so many hoops to jump through, I just couldn't manage it a lot of the time.
Yeah.
And it wasn't terrible. It wasn't soul crushingly bad until later.
Oh yeah.
And then I reproduced the exact same thing when I moved to Los Angeles and I started a band and it was my band and I'm writing the music and I'm doing most of the business and all of this pressure and like.
Was that Junkyard?
Yeah. And we're making our first studio record and I'm living with a girl and we're dealing meth at the same time. And, I put a screwdriver all the way through my hand after having been in the studio for 14 hours and I come home and I'm wired to the teeth. And so I'm taking things apart at 4 a.m. and slipped and hurt my hand. And, you know, and that sort of stress just waylaid me, you know, and eventually the meth became heroin and, you know, and after the record deal went away and everything else went away, you know, I'm convinced that my mental health, my poor mental health was one of the main drivers of my addiction. You know, I also believe that my family is wired for spiritual malady. We just get disconnected. It's just, we just do. Nobody in my family drinks really.
What do you
on either
say
side.
what do you mean when you say spiritual malady? What do you mean by that?
That sort of internal condition that makes me uncomfortable in my skin all the time. The blackness that a lot of people think is depression, for me, is not depression.
Okay.
It's spiritual malady. It's a spiritual issue that can be solved with some spiritual tools. Like, the interesting thing is, like, I still have I stopped taking an antidepressant in about 2005 because the one that was working, they stopped making, and I just couldn't go through finding another one. And I was doing pretty good. Actually, I got put on this thing called trazodone. I was just using it to help me sleep, and it was fine.
Yeah,
it was fine.
That. Yeah.
And then I had to do a psych eval about 8 or 9 years ago. But I have these periods during the year, 2-3 times a year, where for somewhere between 5 and 10 days, like, it feels like I'm walking around in waist deep water and I can't think straight. And I, you know, I'm achy, and it's just all the physiological signs of depression, you know, but I don't get depressed. And I was doing this psych eval for this project I was working on. And the psychiatrist was talking to me, and it happened to coincide with one of these periods. And he, you know, it's an hour-long evaluation, and like half an hour into it, he stopped. And he said, you know, you're presenting with very marked physiological symptoms of depression. And I said, yeah, it's bad right now. It's not always like this, but it's bad right now. He said, but you don't seem depressed at all. I said, no, I'm not. And he's going, I've been doing this 35 years. I've never seen that. How do you account for that? And I said, well, I have this very active spiritual program, and that blackness of spirit is a spiritual issue for me. And as long as I don't let what's going on with me physically scare me, I can move through it and give myself permission not to get much done. And my brain will course correct in a little bit, and it'll be all right. And he was just like, I've never seen that before. But, you know, that's it for me. Like, in the midst of my addiction and my spiritual malady, my spiritual, what is the word my wife used? I was spiritually compromised for a while.
Nice.
You know, I believe based on experience, spirituality is not a choice. Every human has a spirit, like they have a body and a mind. Doesn't have to be anything religious about that. And I also believe that just like physical health and mental health, I have spiritual health. I may be in great physical health or terrible physical health, but I have physical health somewhere on a scale as long as I'm breathing. And same is true of mental and spiritual. And I also believe that, to a large extent, my thinking and everybody else's thinking is heavily impacted, if not entirely based on my spiritual condition while I'm thinking. You know, a lot of people have experience with this. You know, I always ask people, have you ever done anything really stupid when you were really angry?
Right.
You know, it's like, well, yeah. And it's like, when I'm angry, I'm spiritually disconnected because something's feeling threatening, and I get spiritually disconnected. And then I do something based on that internal condition that 20 minutes later, I'm like, what the hell? Why would I say that?
Right.
Why would I do that? That's crazy. Why would you? But in that spiritual condition, it's all I could do. And so if I can maintain this spiritual practice that I've developed over the last 23 years, then my thinking stays pretty clear. I'm comfortable in my skin, and I don't get misdiagnosed, because I got diagnosed with all kinds of stuff through the 80s and 90s.
Oh yeah. Tell me about that.
Well, you know, I got, you know, diagnosed with with I mean, one psychiatrist thought I tried to have me involuntarily committed as a sociopath. You know,
Oh,
and she said I had the worst dissociative disorder she had ever seen, and she was right, but not the way she thought. You
mm,
know, I mean, for a sociopath, right and wrong are concepts, but they don't make a difference.
right.
And I was totally in that place. You know, it's like, because when I'm completely spiritually bankrupt, right and wrong, doing the wrong thing doesn't hurt me. Nothing can hurt me more than I already hurt.
Mm,
And so, you know, and as I got sober and started working doing more of a spiritual practice, prayer, meditation, and that sort of thing. And, you know, and I should say this for anybody who's listening, I still don't believe in God, but I'm certain that there's some sort of a spiritual power that I'm tapping into that runs through everything. I don't know what it is. Don't care.
that's so wild.
Right. You know, and it's but if I take these certain actions, I can feel relatively comfortable in my skin. And I've over time, I've developed the ability to be the kind of man I always meant to be and usually wasn't.
Mhm.
And so I'm certain the spiritual practice has part of that, but like, I mean, I can't even remember all the different, you know, meds I got put on, you know, for
Yeah.
this and for that. And it was like, I'm not schizoaffective. What did you put me on this for?
Right.
Like, I have voices in my head, but I don't believe there's somebody.
Right,
know?
right.
You know?
And if you're any kind of creative person, then that label you get attached to that label very quickly.
Right. And,
Yeah.
and so
Yeah.
it wasn't until, you know, and it's all this figuring it out. You know, I spent the last 4 years I was using terrified of dying and wishing I were dead all day, every day.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I mean, it's my belief that, and I don't know what the numbers are now because fentanyl is skewing everything, but pre-fentanyl, I would say that 60% of all drug overdose deaths are intentional.
Mm.
Or, you know, it's not an overdose. And maybe half of them are people trying to kill themselves on purpose. And the other half are people like me who were too afraid to kill themselves, but were as reckless as they could be, hoping that it would happen by accident. You know,
Yeah.
it's like, if I do this shot and then I don't come out the other side, well, I guess that's okay.
Yeah.
You know?
I'm definitely of that animal. Yeah.
You know, I put myself in positions where, you know, it's a miracle the people I was running around with didn't kill me. I knew that was a distinct possibility. I hung out with them anyway because I didn't care if I lived or died, but I was too chicken to kill myself.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
it's funny.
So you have this chemical phenomenon, right? And you're doing drugs and alcohol. Was it the drugs and alcohol that made you so reckless, or was it? I mean, what?
No, well, it was the hopelessness. You know, it was,
which is a spiritual condition.
Well, and because my psychological condition was so bad, because of my spiritual condition and my physical, you know, all three are tied together. It's like, imagine 3 orbs floating in space with elastic between them. You pull on one, the other 2 don't stay in position either. You know, so the more spiritually unfit I get, the more unmoored my mind is, the worse shape my body's in, the worse my spiritual condition is. And it was all tied together, and there didn't seem to be a way out. Like I said, I'm a systems analyst, and there's very little in life that I have not been able to figure out and work to my advantage. In fact, there's only one thing in life that I'm certain I was unable to figure out and work to my advantage, and that was my addiction. You know, and my ability to figure things out nearly killed me.
Yes.
You know,
yes.
Until I went somewhere where they could explain what was really going on. And I went, oh, there's a third variable I didn't know about.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
I mean, to contemplate the lack of control and the idea that I couldn't manage it myself was just unfathomable.
And I can't think my way out of it.
Yeah.
I got a pretty good, you know, I used to be really smart. I mean, the drugs and alcohol sanded a lot of that out, but you know, I just couldn't understand why I couldn't figure this out. It was because there was a variable I didn't know about, you know, and, you know, depression, anxiety, you know, that was just the world I lived in, you know. Right. I mean, I'm convinced, like, my mom's family, my dad's family, nobody really drinks or does drugs or anything else. There's not a lot of that culturally on either side of the family. On my mom's side of the family, there is a history of suicide though. And I believe that if you have wrong with you, what was wrong with me mentally and spiritually, and there's no drugs to make it better, then killing yourself is one of the options.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, I mean, you don't have any other way to find relief.
Well, when I hear your story, that's the outcome I imagine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, I mean, I'm convinced without a doubt that had it not been for heroin, at some point in the 90s, I would have killed myself. But instead, I found a way not to exist for a few hours every day. And it was enough to keep going. You know, right up until it took so much to find any relief that I was in respiratory arrest or my heart stopped over and over and over.
Oh, Jesus.
You know, and that was where I was living the last 2 years. I was dead 4 times and brought back, you know, and
God, Chris.
And, you know, it's like, I tell the story all the time. I had to do a stress test for a health insurance thing about 10 or 12 years ago. And they're looking at the EEG printout after I've been on the treadmill and all the rest of that. And they're going, when did you have your heart attack? And I said, I never had a heart attack.
Oh, damn.
And then I stopped and I went, with that Pulp Fiction, you know, you mean, the guy said, you mean the adrenaline through the sternum? Yeah, that would count. And I was going, no, I did that twice in 98. You know, I tried my problem wasn't I was afraid I was going to die. My problem was I couldn't stay dead. People kept bringing me back, you know, like, son of a bitch, I can't keep doing this. There's got to be a better way to live. I don't know what it is.
Yeah.
You know, I better go try and find somebody who does.
Right.
You know, and the funny part was right after I got sober, I ended up in this men's group. And one of the guys in there was a hardcore depressive. He had, you know, he was about a year sober or something at the time, but he was still like, and he hadn't done anything about it. He hadn't gone to see anybody or whatever, but he was like, you know, mopey and wanting to kill himself. And one of the old guys at the group looked at him one day and went, after he was talking about it, and was going, so how long you want to be dead? And the guy said, well, till it stops hurting. Going, you know, that's not how dead works, right? And it was like, he had to stop for a minute and think about it. And then like the next day, literally the next day, he came back. And he was looking completely dejected. And we're going, all right, man, what's going on? He's going like, you know, after that dude said that yesterday, I went home and I thought about it. And what if dying doesn't help? Like, I've got no proof that dying makes this stop hurting. What if it doesn't make it stop hurting?
Right.
He was going like, now what do I do? It's going like, maybe you go see somebody so it doesn't have to hurt while you're alive, dude. It's like, I was like, yeah, but it's like, I remember hearing him say that and hearing a little door back somewhere behind me go click and disappear into the wall. I was like, oh, what if it doesn't help?
Oh, damn.
You know, I mean, I think it's one of the Hindu religions that has a thing where like, because there's reincarnation built into all those, where it's like, if you die without having solved the problems of the body, you go to a place where there is no body to solve those problems with, and that's hell. You're just stuck there forever. You can't come back because there's no way to fix what wasn't fixed before. And I'm like, yeah.
That doesn't sound like a good time.
No, you know, all right, fine. I'll be uncomfortable and we'll figure it out.
Right,
You know?
right. But as you mentioned earlier, like, it's really hard to advocate for yourself when you're that down, you know.
Right.
It truly is.
But I mean, it's my belief that, I mean, people talk about suicide being a selfish act and stuff, but I don't think selfish is the right word. I think self-centered or self-focused is the right word. Because when I was in those places, it's like I'm in a room with no doors and no windows, and how I feel is how I have always felt and how I will always feel. And I have to do something, and I only can think of one thing, you know, and it feels like my only choice. It's why suicide hotlines work, because 2 minutes on the phone with another human being opens a window to that room I'm in, and I'm no longer in there by myself, and it's not the only world. But you're right. It's like even just dialing the phone and asking for help. And it's why people who tend towards depression have to do the single hardest thing for most of us when we're not depressed, which is have friends.
Yes.
you know, be
Yes.
part of a community,
Yes.
you know.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm alive, I think, because of that. Because after having built, after having let some people get to know me,
Hmm.
you know, in the 12-step world,
Hmm.
I showed up for work one day and my job had disappeared. Like the company went out of business, didn't tell anybody, and the skills weren't transferable. And the only thing I'm good at is playing music, which no one will pay me for, and a bunch of criminal stuff that I'm not comfortable doing anymore. And I spent 5 days sitting in my house freaking out, trying to figure out what I was going to do about money. And after not showing up for a few days, some of those men came and found me because they knew where I lived.
Hmm.
And they came over to check on me, and they figured out what state I was in, and they gave me some instructions, and they rode my ass until I followed them so I could get back on a more even keel.
Hmm.
You know, but it was like, if they hadn't come to the house, I don't know how much longer I could have gone without getting loaded. And for me, that doesn't go well.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
you know, it's I have to, I wonder if the correlation is as close to 1-to-1 as I imagine it is between people who tend towards depression and introverts.
Right.
You know, I mean, I don't know, because I'm an introvert. I don't know. Maybe lots of extroverts are also, you know, I mean, really the definition of introvert and extrovert is really just sort of like an extrovert feels recharged when they're around a bunch of people, and an introvert feels recharged when they get by themselves.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a musician and a performer, and I was around tons of people last night and I enjoyed it. And I was super grateful to get home and sit in the quiet with my wife. You
It's
know,
exhausting. It is truly
well, you know,
exhausting.
and it's invigorating while I'm doing it, but I got a short window. I can't do it for hours. I'm good. I was good for like 20 minutes before we played and 20 minutes after, and I got to go.
Yeah.
And you know, and maybe I'm sure there are lots of people who are extroverts who are depressed too. You know, it's just, I think everybody must have mine or my version of existence, or that they don't exist, but you know.
But it's an interesting point you bring up, because I was working on a play. It was a 1-person show. It was, you know, the Sam show. And it was getting some legs and some traction. And I was doing this thing every night in front of, you know, 7,500 people. And it involved people all day long. And I relapsed. And I'm not attributing it to, you know, obviously there were things that I didn't do, but there is a component of like, I need that isolation.
Yeah, I got to have time to recharge. And like,
recharge,
I mean, like,
yeah.
I worked for myself for 9 years,
Mm-hmm.
and like moved in with and married my wife 3 years into that. And like, so I'd be at home alone all day, every day. And then when the kids would come home and she would come home, it would be awesome. And I would be glad to be with them. And then I started working outside the house, got a job working for somebody else. And I'd be around people all day, every day. And literally the job for the first year was talking to people on the phone all day, every day, doing peer coaching. And by the time I got home, I wanted to go in a room and shut the door and not talk to the people I loved most.
Yes.
And, you know, and of course I found a balance, you know, when I went home, I would tell everybody I was glad to see them. And then I would go in a room for 30 minutes by myself, and then I could come back out. But, you know, it's, you know, with depression, because it saps all of my energy, and because being around people feels like it's going to especially when I have depression, feels like being around other people also saps my energy.
Yeah.
And so I already don't have any energy. And so I'm just going to sit here. But the more I stay alone, the more isolated I become in my own mind, and the more I run out of choices.
Yes.
You know, and it's like, there's a great quote. I can't remember where it came from, but the quote is, "We dull our lives by how we imagine them." And
I love that.
And it's like, it was aimed at people who are settling for a job and never doing anything they enjoy, blah, blah. But it's doubly applicable in this situation, because if I have depression, it very quickly becomes, this is how it's always been, and this is how it's always going to be. And I dull my life because this is all I can imagine.
Right. So in that regard, like, I had this experience in September where I went away for a month to like really focus on my trauma and PTSD and depression. And, you know, I hadn't been in a psych ward in a long time, but it was it was a really good place and it was really helpful. But it was definitely the love of friends that got me out of that. What is it that, but okay, so when I got out though, the circumstances hadn't changed. The circumstances were the same. And I thought, well, how am I going to keep going? How am I going to live if nothing's changed and I'm still miserable? And so have you had that experience or like?
Of course, everybody does. But the thing that I don't understand, even to this day, I have a better handle on it than I ever have. But even to this day, is like things don't change for the better by themselves. You have to change them.
Mhm.
You know, especially once your life is in that place.
Yes.
The entropy that's happening is causing things to fall apart.
Yes.
And not fall together. Once I get up a certain, you know, once I've escaped the inertia, because this is the thing I've been talking about with a lot of people who are coming out of the pandemic and they've been basically hiding at home.
Yeah.
And there's this intense inertia around leaving the house.
Right.
And it's like,
like a pseudo depression.
Right. Well, I heard Michelle Obama talking about suffering from a low-grade depression, and I realized that I had all the same symptoms she had, but I don't think it's depression. I think it's social isolation.
Yes.
Because we're not having any casual conversations with anybody because we all got masks on, and I just want to go back to my office and shut the door so I can take the mask off.
Yes.
But like when my life, whether it's my own doing or just life falling apart around me, it feels overwhelming because it feels like it's my job to do it all right now. And, but it takes that community to remind me, you can't do it all right now. It didn't come apart all at once. It's not going to come back together all at once.
Right.
You know, but what can you do right now? And what can you do tomorrow? You know, it's that the unspoken part of the serenity prayer. It's God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I can't do right now. They're my job, but not today.
Right.
And the courage to change the things I can right now, because right now is the only time I can do anything, and the wisdom to know it's right now. And so it really is about and how that works and where a lot of people with depression who don't have a built-in community, either through their church or through a 12-step fellowship or through whatever, is that there has to be somebody in front of me on the path encouraging me on. Because I can't imagine that it's ever going to come back together. Like, and if I can't imagine it, it's not.
Right. Exactly.
But I see somebody, you know, it's like.
So what is it that makes you move forward? Like, what gives you joy? What is the thing that?
Well, for me, you know, coming out of those disastrous periods or going through a challenge, I always go out and find a mentor, a sponsor who's already been through that challenge. So that I can talk to them about how they did it, so I can try to do what they did. And that keeps me moving. Yeah. You know, this is like peer coaching is huge. And it didn't start in the recovery world. It started with schizophrenics.
I love that. Say more about that.
There was a guy, a psychiatrist who treated schizophrenics, I think in Wisconsin. And schizophrenics are notorious for not sticking on their meds. And but he had a couple that were very med compliant and were having great lives. And their symptoms were totally manageable and they were building lives. And so he put together this group therapy thing that I think he only stayed in it for the first week or two, where he brought in the two that were med compliant and all the ones who weren't so that they could talk to each other. And what he found over the course of 6 months of letting this group happen under his roof is that more than half of the ones who weren't med compliant became med compliant. Wow. Because the therapist isn't schizophrenic. Right. But that guy is. And that guy says taking the meds has allowed him to get a job in a car. I want a job in a car.
Oh my God, that's so AA. That's so.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
But they needed to see somebody ahead of themselves on the path. You know, and I'm sure this is the same way other place. There are a lot of peer coaches in the Austin area who are working with people with substance use disorder, but there's an entirely different training section for mental health peer coaches. And there's a lot of mental health peer coaches, and there are people who are doing both.
Yeah.
So that you can have lived experience when you're talking to somebody with depression or bipolar or whatever, because you're succeeding and you're moving forward and they're at the early stages. And so, being able to have those relationships. And then, for me, it's once I do something and it makes me feel more hopeful or better about myself, it builds my self-esteem. It gives me, it reinforces some ambitions I have. It gives me some emotional security. Once I get that, well, then I want to do it again because, that made me feel better about it. Yeah. And being able to gather that awareness of what's working and what isn't by sort of reviewing, what am I doing? And did that serve me or did it not function very well? And build on my successes and don't do the things again that didn't work, and every day, it's what recovery is built on. But I think whether I'm trying to recover from depression or substance use disorder, it's sort of the same model. I got to take action and then examine my experience with that action so that I can repeat the things that worked well and stop doing the things that didn't, and then eventually I'm also a big fan of outward signs of inward progress. I remember buying my first car that I wasn't going to be the last owner of, I had a job, I had some money, I just hadn't bought and I was driving for a living. And I had a crappy little car with no air conditioning and no stereo. Somebody told me I was an idiot and I went out and paid cash for a car that was nice. It's only a few years old. It was great. And every time I walked out, got in that car, it made me feel better about myself.
Yes.
Because I had earned it, and it's like there used to be a character on Saturday Night Live. I think it was Billy Crystal, who used to say it's better to look good than to feel good. And I always added onto that, for the addicts and the people suffering from mental health stuff, because I might feel better later and I'm stuck in this outfit, I keep my house clean on a regular basis because I'm gonna have a dark day. And when I have that inescapable dark day, at least my house doesn't reinforce that I'm a loser.
Right.
I walk in and go, well, I live in a nice place and it's clean.
Yeah.
So maybe everything's not quite as bad as it feels inside.
Right.
And sometimes it's those little things, and just building things into my daily experience that can remind me that there's more than I'm currently imagining, because 95% of life happens over and over and over. And I need to learn how to show up for it in a way that's reproducible. It can't be a mystery on how I got my car fixed last time. I have to have a car guy. I have a car, which is great, but I need to know where I can take it if there's something wrong with it. Somebody that it's come recommended by a friend that I can trust. So if my car makes noises, I don't have to get afraid. I just have to take it and get it fixed. And, I need to be able to wash the dishes every night and keep my kitchen clean. That takes practice for me. I don't know about everybody else, but me, I have to get good at the 95% of things that are happening over and over, because the other 5% is coming.
Right.
And it's not all bad stuff. Right. It could be falling in love or getting married or having a baby. It could also be the death of a parent or serious illness, things that don't happen enough to be good at them.
Right.
Recurrence of depression, meds stop working.
Yeah.
It happens, but it's not happening all the time. So I don't have muscle memory. So, but if I'm taking care of the 95% that happens over and over again, I'll keep doing that while I'm trying to figure out what to do about this extraordinary thing. But if I'm not good at the 95%, I will stop doing all that while I'm staring at the new thing. And it's all the little stuff that'll shove me back down the hole.
Oh, I love that, Chris. That's amazing.
It's the death of 1,000 paper cuts. Nobody's driven into overwhelming depression by one thing.
Right.
It's a little thing that I tell myself is no big deal, and another little thing that I say is no big deal, and another little thing that's no big deal, and I don't feel very good, and it's no big deal, and it's no big deal, it's no big deal, it's no big deal, until all of a sudden I just break.
Yes.
You know, I always talk about to people about you. Everybody knows the phrase, the straw that broke the camel's back. But why did one straw break the camel's back?
Right.
Because of all the other straw.
Right.
So what straw are you carrying?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and do you need to? And like, I love that you talked about dealing with trauma and PTSD and stuff, because if you have trauma that you've never looked at with a trained professional who can help you move through that, the chances of staying out of depression are thin. The chances of staying sober long-term are thin.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, you may need to get stabilized on your meds. You may need to stay sober for a year or two before you're ready to start unpacking that stuff. That's fine. But I have to be aware that it needs to be done and that I can't put it off forever. And I have to believe that, that there's another side to that challenge, just like there was I was going to get through to the other side of my depression or my substance use disorder, you know?
I mean, it's taken me so long, Chris, to figure that out, that the modalities that I was applying to my trauma were not working. It wasn't cutting it. It wasn't until I went away, did this deep work, and then like now I'm doing EMDR.
Right.
And it's phenomenal.
And, you know, there's all kinds of new stuff coming down the pipe,
Yes.
you know, phenomenal success treating specific, especially single instance trauma with MDMA.
Right.
You know, and
right.
You know, using ketamine for recurring depression. I have a friend who could not get out of a depression no matter how hard he tried. It came on him kind of out of nowhere, and he suffered for a year, and he started doing ketamine infusions, and he did about half a dozen of them over 6 months, and now he's great.
Yeah.
You know, it's like,
stuff is amazing. I mean, I haven't tried it, but yeah.
And, you know, I would have told you, for anybody who, there may be somebody out there like me, I would have told you until 2 years ago that I don't have trauma because I don't have PTSD. But I sat down and had a conversation with a woman who is a licensed counselor who deals with a lot of people who have trauma and PTSD and who I really like. And she told me that the exact same traumatic thing can happen to two people. One will develop PTSD and one won't. And the only difference in the two of them is whether they felt safe and cared for as a child. And I definitely felt safe and cared for. And so I don't really have much in the way of PTSD around stuff, but a lot of stuff happened to me that was traumatic.
Yes.
You know, my roommate killing himself in my house and leaving me with the mess to clean up was a trauma. Me finding him. Being shot at is apparently traumatic. Dying and being brought back is traumatic. Having to bring my girlfriend back to life myself 2 or 3 times was traumatic. And other things that don't even seem like they should be, like my mom started getting sick when I was about 8, and she died when I was 22. And I'm the oldest, so I started being helpful. Sometimes I was asked, sometimes I just took it on myself.
Yeah.
But I learned some ways of approaching the world, because my mom, whether she was sick or not, kept going. There was stuff to do, and so she just kept going. And so that's what I do.
Wow.
Whether I can carry the weight or not, you know. And I also learned to take on things that nobody's asked me to take on until I have more than I can carry. And so I'm hoping that we get, because I'm not doing it on Zoom, but I'm hoping that we're getting to a place. I've got a couple of good solid referrals from her for people I can work with on this kind of thing, because it's informing my behavior in ways that I'm unaware of, or that I can't seem to stop because I can't untangle the knot by myself.
Yes.
And you know, so just because you're not having a fight or flight response every time you hear a loud noise doesn't mean there isn't some trauma to process.
Yes.
You know,
I think just the event of being human, you are going to almost 100% acquire some trauma.
You know, it's just, I resisted calling it that for a long time, but being able to separate those two, because I know people who have had horrific things done to them,
Yeah.
who have that hardcore adrenaline dump PTSD response all the time. It's like, I don't have that. So
Yeah,
it felt
yeah.
like it felt dumb trying to apply the same terminology to myself because I just don't have what they have.
Yes.
But there are things in my wiring from when I was young, especially, and from the world I got stuck in because of the severeness of my addiction, that have wired methods of thinking into my brain that are now tied intrinsically to my midbrain and my fight or flight that don't need to be.
Yeah.
And and whether it's through EMDR or some other approach, I have to believe that there's a way. Like, discovering those things doesn't make them go away, but it does allow me to take some ownership of them and to regain my power around them, and eventually to start not letting them control my behavior. I have done that on my own around some things.
Yeah.
But some of them, either they're still invisible to me or I'm unable to do it on my own because I don't have enough clarity or the training, quite frankly, to see the truth of it. So,
and one of the great things about recovery is, hey, I can ask for help.
Right. And there's never anything I'm going through that somebody else hasn't already been through.
Exactly.
Nothing.
Yeah.
Nothing. It's like, and thank God for that, because if I'm the only one who's ever experiencing the thing that I'm going through, there may not be a solution to it.
Right.
And I may not like the solution that other people work through, but it doesn't mean there isn't one.
And death might not be the solution.
Right. Almost never. I have a different relationship to death than most people. I'm not super precious about individual human life or human life as a whole. Like, people die, that's sad. I don't think about it too much. I'm practical about it. It's one of those things like, but I don't need a permanent solution to a temporary problem.
Right.
And whatever I'm overwhelmed with right now, I wasn't overwhelmed with 2 weeks ago, and I'll be freaked out about something different day after tomorrow. So,
right.
And it's just like, but I got to be able to have people. I don't know that you can get out of that on your own. I have to have people around, and I'm certain that I have to build those relationships when I'm not in the depths of depression.
Yes.
Because relationships aren't a fire hose.
Right.
I can't just call on somebody when I'm on fire or when I'm drowning. I can't wait till then because the relationship doesn't have enough substance at that point.
Yeah.
I have to build these relationships, even if it's hard. I have to do it because my life may depend on it. There may come a really dark day when, if I don't have one person who's given me the permission to call, no matter what shape I'm in, then I may be screwed, and I'll make a decision I can't take back.
That's incredible advice.
Chris,
thank you so much for talking with me. I really,
it's
really
great
appreciate
to see
it.
you again. Yeah, my pleasure.
Great stuff.
It's everything, 24 years ago, I was dying on a regular basis, and I couldn't help myself. And now my life, my wife tends to joke that I'm living the results of an ill-considered prayer for abundance. And, and nothing in the 23 years I've been doing it shows that that's likely to stop, and still I found myself needing to get back on meds again recently. That's not a failing on my part. That's just body chemistry changes. And it's time I want to be happy. I want a big, cool life that doesn't feel overwhelming.
Yes.
Not just some sad little life where at least I'm not depressed. Which means I got to put myself out there and go do things that are scary, but that will make my life bigger, and so I can do that with support of the people around me. So.
Absolutely. So what are you doing these days? Can you tell the people what you've been up to?
Yeah. After being off work for a while, I just started work last week for this awesome nonprofit. It's a recovery center. There's no counselors or anything. It's a 12-step immersion place for men, chronic relapsing men, run by this guy I really like.
Oh, cool.
And I'm going to I'm going to help him build a long-term continuum, put their alumni, the people who go through there love the place, but there's no real alumni department to speak of. And so I'm going to help him build that, which will help keep people,
sober.
Yeah, help them get out there and build big, cool lives, because they'll be surrounded by people they already know.
Nice.
And so I'm excited about that. I'm also doing some consulting work for some guys that are running a peer coaching company, helping them put some structure around that and collect a little bit of data. Like I said, I just put a band together with a bunch of friends of mine doing nothing but old school punk rock covers and having a ball doing it. We played our first show yesterday. It was super fun.
Excellent.
And I got a sponsor a couple of years ago, well, a year and a half ago, because I'm being encouraged. And I think everybody's born with a talent, something that is easy for them that's not easy for other people.
Mm-hmm.
And mine is talking about recovery and spirituality, apparently. And a few years ago, I was having a conversation with this Buddhist monk and a Hindu priest, or whatever they call Hindu religious people. And one of them started talking about the other side of humility. And, most people, when they say humble, they mean small, but humility really means right-sized. And that means I also have to own my strengths. Mm-hmm. Which nobody wants to talk about because there's responsibility in that and it feels overwhelming. But at some point in my life, I need to get to a place where I'm willing to ask myself, what is the thing about me that I'm uniquely qualified to bring to the world, and how do I develop it? And this talk, I told him, well, I'm participating in the community and blah, blah, blah. And I go, this is not a one at a time thing you're doing. How are you going to reach more people? And then that led to a job at a treatment center where I'm working with 50 people a day and that was great. Now that's ended. Wow. And I'm being pushed towards writing a book and sort of relaunching this YouTube channel that was just getting started when the pandemic, and then I became overwhelmed at work and stopped it. And so I went out and got a mentor who's got a book on the New York Times bestseller list, who feels like a fraud, even though he's the subject matter expert. And, nice. and I hooked up with some friends who helped me reconfigure the YouTube studio. And I'm going to just start releasing videos 2 or 3 times a week of me talking about spirituality in real life, because
you need to be doing that.
Well, I'm not a religious guy, and I'm not an Eckhart Tolle guy, right? Like there's lots of flowery spiritual teachers who speak to a certain audience, but there's another audience who listens to them and goes, where am I in that? I got dirty fingernails. I work for a living. How do I, and I'm more that guy. So I don't want to do any of that. It's terrifying and putting myself out that way, but it doesn't matter. I'm doing it anyway.
Awesome. So, I love it.
It's Big Cool Life. That I have a website. It's bigcoollife.com, and it links to my YouTube channel, and it links to everything else. And, but the whole idea is I didn't get sober to be sober. I got sober to have a big, cool life. I didn't get out of my depression and mental health stuff just to not hurt. I want to have a big, cool life. It's going to take some management, going to take some risk taking, going to take being willing to be uncomfortable while I grow. But okay.
Thanks, Chris.
Yeah, my pleasure.